Chapter 1. Shadows of the past. Isabella Romano moved through the grand halls of the charity event with a careful grace, her eyes scanning the room as if every glance could hide a threat. She had grown up in a world where loyalty was demanded and betrayal could arrive wrapped in a smile, and she had learned to keep her heart and thoughts guarded. Her family's mafia ties were a chain she carried silently, one that made every interaction feel like a delicate dance between caution and expectation. Despite the opulence of the ballroom and the cheerful chatter around her, a quiet tension clung to her like a shadow. She had learned that appearances could be deceiving, and that danger often came disguised as civility. As she approached the center of the room, a subtle shift in the atmosphere caught her attention. His presence was commanding without arrogance, and there was a quiet intensity in the way he observed the crowd. Alessandro Vitale, heir to a rival family, moved with a precision that betrayed both training and confidence. Isabella felt a ripple of unease, the instinctive warning she had honed over years, telling her to keep her distance. And yet, there was something about the way his gaze lingered on her, curious but not threatening, that stirred a flutter she had not felt in a long time. The briefest moment brought them together near the gallery of silent auction items, and their eyes met. It was a collision of worlds and histories, a quiet acknowledgement that each carried the weight of legacy and expectation. Isabella noticed the subtle tension in his jaw, the carefully restrained energy in his posture, and she realized that he, too, understood the danger of attachment. They exchanged polite words about the event and the charitable cause, each sentence measured and careful, yet beneath the surface, an unspoken connection began to form. As the evening continued, Isabella found herself thinking of him more than she expected, her heart betraying a curiosity she could not fully justify. She was well aware that families like theirs could not allow such softness, yet she could not deny the pull she felt. The music swelled around them, a gentle undercurrent to the quiet storm of thoughts in her mind. She reminded herself that curiosity was dangerous, that longing could be a vulnerability and a world that demanded vigilance. And yet, she could not turn away from the subtle warmth in his eyes. By the time the night ended, they had exchanged only a few words, but the memory of their encounter lingered. Isabella left the event with a careful smile, aware of the fragile seed of connection that had been planted. For the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of something that might one day challenge the carefully constructed walls around her heart. Alessandro, too, left with a lingering thought of her presence, the unexpected spark of curiosity and respect that hinted at possibilities neither of them could yet name. In a world defined by loyalty, fear, and unspoken rules, the first quiet threads of something powerful and tender had begun to weave themselves between them, unnoticed by all but the two, who would soon discover that some bonds were stronger than fear and far more dangerous than the world around them realized. Chapter 2. A dangerous proposal. The following week, Isabella found herself reluctantly stepping into a private meeting room, her family's estate, the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. Alessandro Vitale had requested the meeting personally, and though she approached it with caution, she could not ignore the curiosity that had taken root in her heart. The room was quiet, dimly lit by the soft glow of antique lamps that cast long shadows on the polished wood, and every creak of the floorboards seemed louder than usual. She entered with a steadying breath, aware that one wrong word or gesture could unravel everything she had worked to protect. Alessandro was already there, standing by the window with his back to her, his posture composed, but his presence magnetic. When he turned and their eyes met, a faint tension flickered across his usually calm expression, as if he, too, understood the precariousness of the moment. Alessandro wasted no time on small talk, his voice even, but charged with a quiet urgency. He proposed a business arrangement between their families, one that could create peace and mutual benefit, but would require trust, cooperation, and careful maneuvering. Isabella listened, every word carefully weighed, her mind racing through the possibilities and the dangers. She felt the familiar pull of logic clashing with the unexpected flutter of intrigue and admiration she felt toward him. As they discussed details, their hands occasionally brushed over documents, sending sparks she tried to ignore, and every glance exchanged carried a subtle intensity that neither could fully hide. Despite the professional tone, Isabella became acutely aware of Alessandro's presence. The way he commanded attention without force, the way his steady gaze seemed to see through the walls she had built around herself. By the time the meeting ended, they had reached an agreement, but something far more profound had begun to grow between them, a delicate, simmering connection that defied the boundaries of loyalty, family, and the dangerous world in which they both lived. Neither could deny it, and neither could predict where this dangerous attraction might lead. Chapter 3. A night of vulnerability. Quiet of Isabella's family estate was shattered one evening by the sudden roar of engines and the sharp echo of gunfire that sent her heart racing. She had been accustomed to a life shadowed by danger, yet nothing could have prepared her for the fear that tightened around her chest as masked figures appeared in the courtyard. Instinctively, she ducked behind a marble pillar, her pulse hammering, every sense alert to the threat closing in. The sounds of shouts and breaking glass filled the air, and in the chaos, Isabella realized that her careful precautions had been insufficient. Just as panic threatened to overwhelm her, Alessandro appeared, moving with a controlled precision that made her heart skip. He was like a storm contained in human form, decisive and fearless, and in an instant, the danger shifted from a faceless threat to a battle he was determined to face for a dot in the aftermath of the attack. As the intruders were driven off and silence slowly returned to the estate, Isabella found herself trembling in the safety of her study, her hands shaking and her mind racing with adrenaline and gratitude. Alessandro was beside her, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, his eyes filled with concern and a tenderness she had not expected from someone so formidable. In that moment, Isabella glimpsed the layers of him she had only sensed before, the quiet compassion beneath his sharp exterior, the unwavering determination to protect those he cared for, and a vulnerability he allowed only in her presence. They shared a long, wordless moment, standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating between them, and for the first time, Isabella allowed herself to relax, to trust, if only briefly. That night, as the estate settled back into an easy quiet, they spoke softly of fears, hopes, and unspoken truths, their voices blending into the shadows of the room. Every laugh that escaped her lips felt lighter, every glance from him warmer, and by the time she finally retreated to her room, the bond between them had deepened. In the face of danger, trust had begun to take root, and alongside it, the tender beginnings of a love neither of them had dared to imagine. A fragile light in a world long defined by shadows. Chapter 4. Bound by secrets. In the days that followed the attack, Isabella and Alessandro found themselves drawn together more often than either expected, whether through family obligations or carefully arranged meetings to ensure the safety and stability of their families. Every encounter was a delicate balance of civility and unspoken understanding, and yet beneath the surface, curiosity and trust began to weave a quiet bond between them. One evening, as they pored over documents in the dim light of Alessandro's study, their conversation drifted beyond business, brushing against personal histories that neither had revealed to anyone else. Isabella spoke cautiously of her childhood, of the pressure and fear that had shaped her into someone always alert, someone who measured every word and every glance. Alessandro listened with a patience and intensity that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before, and in that attention, a fragile trust began to grow. As the weeks passed, their shared moments revealed more than they had anticipated. Alessandro confided in Isabella about the burdens of being the heir to a family whose reputation demanded obedience and strength above all else, about the loneliness that came with the constant expectation to lead and protect. Isabella, in turn, shared fragments of the pain and isolation that came with her own family's power, the secrets she had carried silently for years, the choices she had been forced to make to survive. Each revelation deepened their understanding of one another and strengthened the unspoken bond between them. But it also reminded them of the delicate web in which they were entangled. Love and trust had begun to grow, but so had the awareness that every secret could become a weapon in the wrong hands. Their moments together were colored with tension, a constant awareness that the world outside their connection was unforgiving. Yet within those moments, they discovered a rare sense of solace, a quiet corner of warmth and understanding in a world defined by loyalty, fear, and the ever-present shadow of betrayal. Chapter 5. The first confession. Evening air was cool and heavy with the scent of jasmine as Isabella found herself walking through the quiet garden of her family estate. Her thoughts a tangled web of fear, longing, and uncertainty. She had spent weeks navigating the growing connection with Alessandro, each interaction leaving her heart both exhilarated and cautious. Every glance, every touch, had become a spark she could neither fully deny nor safely embrace. The danger that surrounded them was ever present, a constant reminder that affection between heirs of rival families could be a weapon as easily as it could be a comfort. And yet, the pull she felt toward him was undeniable, a force that drew her across the stone paths toward a meeting neither of them had planned, but both silently anticipated. Alessandro was already there, leaning against the stone balustrade, the soft glow of lanterns casting shadows across his features that made him look at once imposing and achingly human. When he saw her approach, his lips curved into a small, tentative smile, and for a moment, the weight of their families, their responsibilities, and the world outside seemed to slip away. Words were difficult to find at first, but finally Isabella spoke, her voice trembling slightly as she confessed the feelings she had fought to suppress, the emotions she had hidden behind walls of caution and duty. Alessandro listened, his expression softening, and then he admitted the depth of his own feelings, the longing that mirrored her own and the careful hope he had dared to nurture in secret. In that moment, the fragile barriers around their hearts began to crumble, replaced by a bond both tender and fierce. Their confession was more than words. It was a quiet surrender to the truth of what they felt, a promise unspoken yet understood, that they would protect each other in a world that demanded vigilance and loyalty above all else. The intimacy of the moment was electric, a subtle brush of hands, a shared breath that lingered longer than propriety allowed, yet it brought with it an undeniable sense of connection, a warmth that neither had expected, but both had desperately needed. And as the night deepened around them, Isabella and Alessandro stood together in the garden, hearts laid bare beneath the stars, knowing that this first confession was only the beginning of a love that would be tested by circumstance, family, and the shadows that clung to their lives, but a love that was already strong enough to defy fear and expectation. Chapter 6. Whispers of Betrayal. Fragile peace Isabella and Alessandro had nurtured began to tremble under the weight of whispers and sideways glances. Rumors, like shadows, spread quietly through the halls of both families, twisting truth into suspicion and fueling the ever-present tension that surrounded them. Isabella noticed the subtle changes in her relative's demeanor, the clipped tones, the sharp questions disguised as casual remarks, and the way conversations seemed to pause when she entered a room. Her heart ached with the knowledge that their bond, delicate as it was, had already become a point of contention, a spark that could ignite old rivalries and test loyalties. She walked carefully through her family estate, every smile and nod measured, every word chosen to avoid drawing attention, while silently hoping Alessandro understood the pressures she faced. Alessandro faced similar challenges within his own family. His father's piercing gaze lingered longer than comfortable, and his advisors offered advice that carried the unspoken threat of tradition and expectation. The weight of leadership and responsibility pressed on him from all sides, and yet his thoughts kept returning to Isabella, to the quiet strength she displayed even as the walls of their world closed in around them. Their stolen moments together became brief and precious, a touch of hands behind closed doors, a glance exchanged across crowded rooms, each interaction carrying more weight than either could fully articulate. Despite the growing scrutiny and the threat of opposition, their connection deepened, strengthened by the very danger that sought to drive them apart. Every whispered suspicion and questioning stare reminded them that the world outside their bond was unforgiving, yet it also proved that their feelings were real, undeniable, and worth protecting. In the quiet moments, when the world's judgment was held at bay, they discovered solace in each other, a reminder that love could survive even under the harshest scrutiny, and that loyalty to the heart sometimes demanded courage greater than any battlefield could require. Chapter 7. A Test of Loyalty. Night air was thick with tension as Isabella and Alessandro arrived at the meeting point, a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of the city where whispers of conflict between their families had reached a dangerous crescendo. Both knew that one misstep could ignite a violent confrontation that neither side could easily control, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on their shoulders. Every step toward the building was measured, cautious, each glance exchanged carrying the unspoken acknowledgement of the risks they faced. Isabella's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and anticipation, but beneath it lay a growing resolve. She could no longer deny that her connection with Alessandro had become a source of strength, a quiet anchor amid the chaos that surrounded them. Inside, the meeting began under an uneasy truce, the leaders of both families seated across from one another, their expressions taut with suspicion and restrained hostility. Alessandro and Isabella moved seamlessly through the tense room, negotiating, clarifying, and diffusing threats with careful words and gestures. When tempers flared, they instinctively supported one another, a silent understanding passing between them that their unity could mean the difference between peace and disaster. Every subtle glance, every coordinated effort to protect both families demonstrated a growing trust and intimacy, a bond forged not just in emotion but in action. In the quiet moments between confrontations, Alessandro would offer a reassuring touch. Isabella would meet it with a fleeting but meaningful glance, and each time they did, the strength of their connection deepened. By the end of the night, the threat had been averted through strategy, courage, and their unwavering commitment to one another, leaving both families with a tentative truce, and Isabella and Alessandro with the undeniable proof that together they could face any danger, overcome any obstacle, and that their loyalty to each other was now as essential as the loyalty demanded by their families. Chapter 8. Confessions. Under the stars, night was calm, the city below twinkling with lights that seemed to mirror the quiet anticipation that hung between Isabella and Alessandro. After days of tension, uncertainty, and whispered warnings from both families, they had found a moment of rare solitude on the rooftop of a secluded villa, far from prying eyes and the ever-present scrutiny that governed their lives. The air was cool against Isabella's skin, carrying the faint scent of blooming night flowers that clung to the terraces below. She felt her heart beat faster with every step closer to him, every hesitant glance, every small gesture that had been exchanged between them over the weeks. The weight of the world seemed to lift just enough for them to breathe, to finally acknowledge the depth of what they felt without the constant shadow of danger pressing in. Alessandro turned to her, his expression softened by the glow of the stars, the intensity in his eyes replaced with something vulnerable and unguarded. Isabella felt a flutter of emotion she could no longer contain. She took a tentative step toward him, the distance between them shrinking with each heartbeat. Words came slowly, almost reverently, as they shared the truth of their feelings, the confessions long held behind careful walls now spilling into the open. Alessandro admitted the longing that had haunted him since their first encounter, the way every thought seemed to return to her, the way he found courage in her presence even when faced with impossible odds. Isabella, her voice trembling yet steady, confessed her own fears, her own hopes, and the quiet, unrelenting pull she felt toward him. Despite the danger that surrounded them, time seemed to slow as they stood beneath the vast expanse of the night sky. The cities hummed far below them, and for the first time, neither considered the weight of their families, their responsibilities, or the dangers waiting beyond the villa. Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining with a tentative certainty that spoke volumes more than words ever could. A gentle breeze lifted strands of her hair, and Alessandro brushed them behind her ear, his touch sending warmth through her entire body. The confession was not just an acknowledgement of love, but a promise, a mutual vow that they would protect one another, that they would remain steadfast even when the world sought to tear them apart. They spoke of dreams and fears, of the lives they had been born into and the futures they dared to imagine together. Laughter occasionally escaped them, soft and light, breaking the heaviness that had accompanied them for so long. While tears glimmered in the corners of Isabella's eyes, born of relief, happiness, and the sudden realization that she was no longer alone in her struggles. Alessandro held her close, their foreheads touching, hearts beating in a quiet rhythm that felt like the first real harmony they had ever known. In that moment, under the stars, with the night enfolding them in its silent embrace, Isabella and Alessandro discovered that love could be both fragile and unstoppable, that trust could grow even in the shadow of danger, and that together, it was a night of confessions, of unspoken promises, and of the first true understanding that their bond had grown beyond attraction, beyond curiosity, and into a love fierce enough to withstand the trials yet to come. Chapter 9. Facing the consequences. News of Isabella and Alessandro's undeniable connection spread through both families like wildfire, carrying with it the inevitable weight of judgment, suspicion, and resentment. Isabella felt the shift the moment she entered her family estate that morning. The servants moved with hesitant glances, conversations paused as she walked by, and her relatives' eyes were sharp, measuring, critical. Every smile she offered felt strained, every word carefully weighed, because she knew that loyalty was no longer just about obedience, but about survival. The whispers of betrayal and disapproval were no longer quiet rumors, they had become accusations, a mirror reflecting the impossible position in which she now stood. Her heart ached at the realization that love, once a fragile solace, had now become a source of conflict that threatened to engulf everyone it cared about. Alessandro faced similar turmoil within his own family, where the weight of tradition and expectation pressed down on him a physical force. His father's gaze was relentless, loaded with disappointment and the unspoken warning that deviation from family norms could not be tolerated. Alessandro, however, stood firm, his loyalty to Isabella unwavering despite the pressures. Together, they confronted the storm, walking into tense meetings and private confrontations side by side, their bond evident in the subtle exchanges, the protective gestures, and the quiet defiance that neither family could ignore. They spoke with honesty and courage, articulating their feelings while asserting the importance of trust, compassion, and love. Even in a world dominated by power struggles and old rivalries, the confrontation was not without strain. Harsh words were spoken, accusations thrown, and old grievances reopened. Yet through it all, Isabella and Alessandro remained steadfast. They discovered allies in unexpected places, relatives who had grown tired of endless conflict, advisors who recognized the strength in their unity, and friends who saw the genuine love that flourished despite danger. Each act of support, each acknowledgement of their devotion, became a quiet victory, reinforcing the idea that love could inspire change even in families steeped in tradition and suspicion. In the quiet moments, away from heated debates and probing eyes, Isabella and Alessandro would retreat to small corners of intimacy. A shared touch, a glance, a whispered reassurance, reaffirming that their bond was unbreakable. By the end of the day, both families had been forced to acknowledge the reality of their love. While tensions still lingered, Isabella and Alessandro stood together with courage, proving that loyalty to the heart could challenge rigid expectations, that love could break cycles of mistrust, and that even in the harshest of worlds, people willing to stand together could inspire change and hope where none seemed possible. Chapter 10. vows of the half-morning sun spilled golden light across the courtyard, illuminating the gathering of both families in a rare display of unity that seemed almost surreal after the weeks of tension, whispers, and quiet struggles that had tested every bond. Isabella stood at the center, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation, relief, and a joy she had long convinced herself was impossible. She had walked through shadows, braved uncertainty, and faced judgment to arrive at this moment where love, finally unrestrained, could be celebrated openly. Alessandro approached her, his gaze soft yet filled with the same unwavering intensity that had drawn her in from the very beginning. The world around them, the grandeur of the courtyard, the murmurs of relatives, the warmth of the sun seemed to fade into the background as their eyes locked, communicating everything that words could not. Their vows were more than promises. They were affirmations of resilience, courage, and unwavering devotion. Isabella spoke first, her voice steady despite the flutter of excitement in her chest, recounting not only the love she felt for Alessandro, but also the journey they had shared, the moments of fear, the nights of vulnerability, the quiet trust and small joys that had grown into a bond that no danger could sever. Alessandro followed, his words a mirror of hers, pledging to protect her heart, to honor the love that had flourished against the odds, and to stand beside her through every trial that life might present. Their families listened, some with surprise, some with cautious hope. Yet even in the faces of skeptics, there was acknowledgement that the love between Isabella and Alessandro had transcended rivalry, fear, and tradition. As they exchanged rings and seals of devotion, the air seemed to vibrate with the power of their union. Hands intertwined, hearts aligned, they felt the weight of legacy ease, just enough to allow the promise of a shared future to take hold. The courtyard, once a place of observation and judgment, became a space of celebration, with quiet smiles, tentative blessings, and an unmistakable sense that love had won where suspicion and rivalry had once reigned. In that moment, Isabella and Alessandro were not just lovers, defying circumstance. They were partners, equals, and anchors for each other in a world that demanded both courage and loyalty. As the sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the estate, they took a moment for themselves, walking side by side through the gardens, sharing laughter and quiet words, their hearts still pounding but filled with a peace that had long eluded them. The shadows of the past lingered, as they always would, but now they were tempered by the certainty of love, the strength of family bonds that had shifted in subtle, hopeful ways, and the knowledge that together they could face whatever came next, bound not only by the vows of their families, but by the vows of their hearts. Isabella and Alessandro embraced a future defined by trust, passion, and the unwavering certainty that love, when nurtured with courage and honesty, could triumph over fear, rivalry, and the trials of life. It was a beginning as much as it was a culmination, a moment of pure, uncheckable connection that promised endless possibilities beyond the shadows that had once constrained them.